Yes, welcome everybody to our webinar today. We are very excited that you are joining us. So the webinar today is about the topic mainstreaming gender responsiveness and energy access projects and policies. And this webinar today is the last part of a series of other webinars that we have been co-producing in collaboration with Access Coalition. For example, our last webinar dealt with the topic of inclusive energy planning, maximizing the impacts from energy access. And before getting into today's topic, just a quick reminder for all of you that you can find the key takeaways we have co-produced with our speakers in the last webinars on our website, visions.net. So if you're interested and you would like to know what topics we have been dealing with before, you can take a look at our website. So my name is Madeleine Rabe, and I'm a junior researcher at the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy and a collaborator at the Visions Initiative. Yes, and I'm very glad to facilitate today's webinar, in which we will deal with the question on how to mainstream gender responsiveness in energy access projects and policies, and how energy access interventions can effectively contribute to the empowerment of women. As many of you probably know, energy poverty strongly affects people's livelihoods and social conditions and undermines educational and business opportunities, especially in rural areas. However, women in rural areas suffer the most from the consequences of energy poverty. The reason for this lies in the different norms associated with gender and the resulting differences in responsibilities and opportunities. Access to clean energy can positively influence health, safety, education, and possibilities for economic development of women and girls. This makes it all the more important to think about gender and gender-related needs in the access to energy context, as gender-blind approaches further institutionalize and reproduce existing inequalities. So in this webinar today, we will learn how gender responsiveness can be integrated into energy access projects and policies, and what aspects gender responsive projects must consider in order to effectively contribute to overcome these inequalities. And to learn more about the topic, we are very fortunate to have three great speakers and experts on the topic here today. And yeah, if you have any questions to our speakers during the presentations, please write them down or insert them in the chat function, and we will have a possibility for discussion afterwards with all of you after our speakers finish their presentations. And yeah, please always insert your questions along with the name of the speaker you want to address your question to. So first of all, I would like to introduce Silvia Sartori to you. For the past 17 years, Silvia has been working in different capacities on multiple international development and cooperation projects at the nexus of energy, environment and climate, and women's empowerment and entrepreneurship. Also private sector development, innovation and sustainability. Between 2021 and 2022, she led the Women's Economic Empowerment Forum portfolio of Energia, the international network on gender and sustainable energy, and currently she's working as a senior expert on women in energy in Central Asia with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Welcome, Silvia. Thank you for joining us today, and we are very glad to have you here. You can already turn on your camera and start your presentation. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeleine, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. Let me just, okay, oops. Yeah, I hope you can see my screen all right. And you can
yes, we can.
Right.
Yes,
okay, very good. Yeah, thank you very much, Jen, again to the organizers for having me on this very interesting and relevant event. And it's really a pleasure to be also joined by this excellent co-panelist. I thought at the start of the webinar, I would like to have set the scenes of the key discussions and the key terminology that will be used in the course of the hour. So I would basically like to start explaining what we mean exactly with gender responsiveness, and then how we can practically embed it within a project or a program. So to start with, I would like to clarify the key concept here, meaning gender responsiveness, because in my experience across different projects and with different organizations, I see that very often terms like gender responsive or gender sensitive are used as if they were synonyms, when in fact they are not. They have very different meanings, and they stand for very different levels of gender integration and consideration of gender aspects. You see here in this graph, I try to depict the different layers and the different levels of integration or lack of integration of gender aspects within a given project or a program. We start from a lower end, from what is considered as a gender discriminatory level of integration of gender, up to the uppermost level, which is that of gender transformative. So I will give just a quick explanation of this key terminology. So gender discriminatory is considered a project or a program that reinforces existing negative social and cultural norms and practices that effectively harms women and girls. On a slightly better, but still not acceptable level, we have gender-blind projects or programs that are those that ignore differences between genders and power and the different needs and power dynamics between men and women. And in so doing, they contribute to continue perpetuating these differences and gender inequality as a whole. On a slightly better sense, I would say that the basic level of the most basic acceptable level of gender integration is that of gender sensitive projects, which are those that do recognize the gender differences, different needs, different power dynamics, different access to resources between men and women, but do not intentionally integrate them into the design and implementation of the project. The key word we have here in today's seminar is that of gender responsiveness, which basically refers to a project or a program that is aware of the gender differences between in the target territory and in the target context, and thus integrate specific actions to address the root inequalities, the root causes of the inequalities, and the vulnerabilities that are leading to that inequality. On an even better level, the higher level of integration of gender considerations, we have the so-called gender transformative approach, which is one where the project or the program not only is aware of the different needs and power dynamics between the different genders, is also taking actions to address the root causes of the gender inequalities, but also goes a step further in trying to actually not just avoid perpetuating existing root causes of gender inequalities, but actually pushes to advance, support, and strengthen the positive norms that, on the other hand, are advancing gender equality. So I hope this helps a little bit to, first of all, to shed light on what exactly we are meaning with gender responsiveness and the other different levels of gender integration here today. So moving on to the second part. How do we then ensure that a project or a program is effectively mainstreaming gender responsiveness into its implementation? And to do so, there are two main tools, both of which are to be utilized at the very beginning of a project design. So this is really something I would like to stress. It's really important that these considerations and these measures are taken at the very early stage of a project design. And I'm referring to a gender analysis, which is otherwise also known as a gender assessment, coupled with a gender action plan. A gender analysis is basically a document where, before designing a project, we capture the current situation on the ground in our target geography, in our target social community area, of the current situation of gender equality in that territory. So we are looking at things like how are men and women differently affected by a given problem or a given question that we are trying to address? What is the current policy environment that stipulates rights, freedoms, and opportunities for men and women? What level of access to and ownership of resources do men and women have? What are the power dynamics between the different genders, both in society as a whole, but also at the household level? So this is basically really to take a photo of where that given country, community, whatever your target constituency is, to take a photo of where they stand right now in terms of gender equality. Based on this information, we can then create what is considered a baseline assessment, which is useful to then move on to the second phase of the gender mainstreaming process. A gender analysis is very important to be conducted at the very beginning because, as said, it allows us to understand exactly what is going on at the moment in the country in terms of power relations, root causes of inequalities, existing types and levels of vulnerabilities. But on the other hand, becoming aware of these critical areas, of these challenges, and of these vulnerabilities allows us also to identify potential entry points to address them and to advance opportunities to foster a stronger gender equality and women empowerment. So it allows us to become not just fully aware of what is going on in the country, but also to start identifying potential resources in terms of both stakeholders, but also really resources in a wider sense that can help us during the project implementation to not just make sure that we minimize and avoid any potential negative effect on genders, but also can help reinforce and strengthen opportunities for a bigger gender equality and stronger women's empowerment. So once we have done a gender assessment or a gender analysis, the next step is that of designing a gender action plan. A gender action plan can be either a standalone document or can be integrated within the log frame of every project. And it's a component basically of the monitoring and evaluation package of any project or program. Doing a gender action plan basically means that for each and every applicable activity in your work plan, you start thinking in terms of gender disaggregated data of what is your ideal and also very much important, what is your feasible objective in terms of impacting the different genders, and allows you and encourages you to identify very concrete, specific, quantifiable and measurable indicators to help you keep track during the project implementation of whether and how your activities are impacting on different genders. So this is built on the basis of the baseline assessment that you would have been able to identify following the initial gender analysis. And it is a product that, to be truly and most effective, needs to be done in close consultations with the stakeholders, meaning that you want to make sure from the very beginning, as with every other aspect of your work plan, that whatever you envision to achieve through your project implementation is something that is really viable. And to do so, you need to make sure that you are fully aware of what are the power dynamics and also the sensitivity issues on the ground. So for that, it is really important to consult your local stakeholders and make sure that either you yourself or your stakeholders in turn are able to consult with any type of vulnerable groups that are present in your target territory. So very practically, a gender action plan is really, it does sound like a daunting exercise to many project designers, but if it is done at the very beginning and with the support and the active engagement of the local, of your local partners and stakeholders, it really allows you to keep track along the way of how you are impacting and engaging the different genders throughout your project implementation. It's also not something that is set in stone at the moment when you design your work plan. It is part of the monitoring process. So as such, it's something that gets continuously revisited and can be continuously adjusted during the project implementation based on how the implementation itself develops. For it to be truly effective and useful, because at the end of the day, it is something that it is a tool meant to help you implement your project at best. It does not have to be to become a burden. It is important that at the very start, not only are, as I said, the indicators, the targets, very specific and measurable, but also that they are backed by very sufficient and adequate resources. And by resources, I mean that it's important that budget is clearly allocated for M&E activities, including gender-related M&E activities, but also that the team is equipped with experts who are able and who are trained to conduct this kind of assessments. And each of these activities, as with every other activity in the work plan, needs to be bound to a very specific timeline. So I would stop it here for now, but I'm happy to discuss this further in the following Q&A session and after the further integrations of my colleague coming up next. Thank you.
So, Silvia, thank you very much for the insightful presentation and explaining in such a clear way what the concept of gender responsiveness actually means and how it distinguishes also from other concepts, and also how gender responsiveness can actually be applied to projects and programs. That was very, very interesting. Thank you very much. Before we hand over to Thabit, yeah, we also want to learn something about you, about our audience, and therefore we prepared a little poll that you can participate in, and you can answer to the question, which sector are you working for? You will see the poll here on the screen now. So now we have the majority from research and academia, and then from civil society organizations, also project developers and technology suppliers, and finance also. It's a very interesting result. Thank you very much for participating. So we can now go to our next speaker, who is Thabit Mikidadi. And Thabit Mikidadi has over 6 years of experience supporting gender inclusivity in Tanzania's energy sector. And his roles have included program development, grant management, advocacy, research, and communications. He successfully led 2 programs and developed over 5 projects at Tangsen, focusing on renewable energy, energy inclusion in local government plans, gender strategic planning in energy companies, and clean cooking initiatives. Welcome, Thabit. We are very glad to have you here as a speaker. And Thabit will now elaborate the question, how can gender and social inclusion be mainstreamed in energy policy, strategy, and programs? Yes, you already turned on your video. Thank you very much. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madeleine. As Madeleine presented me, I'm Thabit from Tangsen, and I'm going to discuss with you about gender mainstreaming in policy. So please, can you, Madeleine, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see everything perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, thank you. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about Tangsen. Tangsen is a gender organization which is based in Tanzania, and our focus mandate mostly is into gender mainstreaming in the energy sector. So our broad spectrum is gender mainstreaming at policy level, but also at the national level, policy level at the local government level, but also we work with private companies, especially in energy access, but also we work with CSOs and development partners to influence policy, but also to develop projects into different areas. Currently, we work in areas like clean cooking, but also we support gender mainstreaming and gender development of gender action development for energy companies in Tanzania. But also we've been working with the Ministry of Energy for 6 years now in the development of gender policies, but also strategies at the national level. Yes. So these are the core mandates area of tangsen. The first one, as I say, is lobbying and advocacy. This is mostly on the national and the local government level. We do capacity building, which is mostly on the side of private companies, CSOs, development partners. But at the same time, we also support empowerment when we develop projects for women, especially at the energy access sites, especially mini-grid areas, but also even the grid access areas. Yes. So directly, why gender in energy policy? Here, I'll just touch several areas, but most of the places which I'm going to talk here, Silvia has already covered in her presentation. But I think when it comes to at the policy level, gender is very important because policy determines if the energy access programs are either gender blind, sensitive, responsive, or transformational. Silvia already explained about these areas, but we know that for a country like Tanzania, policy drives investments, policy drives how the private sector operates and everything. So if the policy is blind, automatically even the private sector in the energy access, most of the places, they'll consider gender as something more altruistic than something which is mandated to do. So at this juncture, policy is actually very crucial to enable the whole country to actually consider gender when it comes to energy access. And even though our goal is mostly transformational, we usually want the very, very transformational policies. Most of the time we find that policies are mostly blind or somewhat sensitive. So most of the time our goal is usually to develop very gender responsive policies so that at least once the gender responsive policy is well implemented, we can jump to the final stage of the transformative policy. But also we know that having a gender policy, having an energy policy which is gender sensitive promotes equal opportunities and access to energy sources for all genders and not only women, because evidence shows that when it comes to energy access, most of the time it is men who are mostly benefiting than women. Why? Because of the societal systems which are mostly accrued that women most of the time do not have power to make decisions and especially access to resources. So most of the time when it comes to energy access and, for example, productive uses of energy, it's mostly women, it's mostly men are the one who benefits more. But also the issue of identification of gender-specific needs. If most of the projects are developed in line to solve a specific needs of the society, whether it could be household use, institutional, or for enterprises, but that's very general. Most of the time, policy actually, if it's gender sensitive, will require all the actors to make sure that they actually go deep down to understand and actually try to solve gender-specific energy needs. But also, the gender policy will allow for inclusion of meaningful participation of women in decision-making policy. If a policy is gender sensitive, most of the time it usually advocates for equality in numbers. But if a policy is gender responsive, it usually ensures that women who are actually in the policy forums actually contributes and actually make decisions which affect themselves and also other people. I'll highlight a little story about tangsen experience in gender inclusion in the policies. In 2015, we had a new energy policy in Tanzania, and the truth is the policy was sensitive. The policy was sensitive in the sense that it recognized gender issues, but it did not have concrete issues that can actually lead actors to develop access programs which are actually even responsive. And tangsen being his mandate being being gender mainstreaming the energy sector, we engaged the Ministry of Energy at that time, it was 2016, to see a way, to find a way to make at least the policy or the policy implementation gender responsive. At that time, we engaged with the Ministry of Energy. They were very responsive, and they actually agreed on the issues of the policy being a little bit blind in many areas which are very important, and they allow us to conduct a systematic review of policies. And at the same time, the government ratified the Sustainable Energy for All Charter, which actually gave us an entry point because Sustainable Energy for All initiative advocate for gender inclusion. So we used that initiative to support the government at that time to see a way that during the implementation of Sustainable Energy for All action plan, which was in line with the policy implementation, it is actually become gender responsive. So in 2017, we supported the analysis, and then in 2018, we developed the Gender Action Plan. The Gender Action Plan was developed in conjunction with the Ministry of Energy, and at the last time, it was actually adopted by the Ministry of Energy as one of their working documents. And from that time onwards, the Gender Action Plan actually directed another stage of development of the capacity. And tangsen by that time having more capacity on gender mainstreaming, specifically on the energy sector, embarked on that session, but we were stuck for 2 years in that area. It was so difficult to engage the government when it comes to capacity development. On one side, we had resources. I remember that time Energia supported us to support the Ministry of Energy to launch the document so that it can become known to actors, and then actors can pledge its implementation. But even though we had resources to do that, it was very hard to for the Ministry of Energy to go back to us and allow us to do that. The second time also, we had time to develop capacity because we say we are going to develop capacity of Ministry of Energy to start actually mainstream gender in their own operations, and well, expecting that the next policy review will allow us to have a gender responsive policy. And that's also, it was very, very difficult. But at the same issue, we found that after a very, very, very long consultations and everything, we found one thing. Not only at that time were there many political issues. Well, there was a general election in 2020, and then in 2021 there was a sudden change in government after the death of the then sitting president. One of the few things which were found is that when it comes to gender mainstreaming, especially at the policy level, in the national level, it is a little bit difficult compared when you do gender mainstreaming at the project level. At the project level, it's easy because mostly the project do not have a huge space to cover. Most of the projects are time bound, and also you have fewer problems to solve. But when it comes to policy, it's broad, and also because it's a national document or it's a national mandate, it becomes a little bit harder for the government to allow an NGO to direct their way. So you can see I showed here at that time that when it comes to the scales, the Ministry of Energy was more heavier than us. It was very, very hard to engage them because to them they think, how can an NGO do all of this to us? You know, most of the time we say like, we can do this, we can do that, and they felt a little bit of being overwhelmed. So this power imbalance, we had to find a way through it because, well, our mandate is to mainstream gender in the energy sector, and we want the policy to become gender responsive. What should we do? So the next stage which we did, that was from 2021, 2022, we decided to do a turnaround. Instead of going directly to the Ministry of Energy, we approached the Ministry of Community Development. At that time, it was reformed. It was called the Ministry of Community Development and Gender and Women, and it had a national mandate to mainstream gender, not only in the national level but in all policies. At that time, the ministry itself was embarking on a nationwide review of many policies, and yeah, at the same time also tangsen was working with this same ministry to strengthen their energy sector portfolio, because at that time they found out that they did not have much capacity when it comes to gender mainstreaming in policy. So through this connection, we approached them and told them what we went through, and actually they told us that it is very hard for an NGO to go through and create that issue of influencing the world ministry to do something. So we said to them that, you know what, we will do that for you. And since then, we've been working with the communities of community development to actually mainstream gender in the energy sector. For us, we refrain to do that because we are so a little bit agitated to see that we are supposed to work with two different ministries. That is a lot of, a lot of politics and also a lot of bureaucracy. But at this stage, we found that that is actually the best way to do, because it's not us we are approaching the Ministry of Energy, it's the Ministry of Community Development approaching them. The Ministry of Community Development allowed us to create capacity to them so that they can create capacity to the Ministry of Energy. So in Tanzania's case, this could work. I'm not sure about other countries' case, but one lesson which I can say we learned from that is that there are usually multiple entry when it comes to policy influencing. Most of the time we have straightforward issues that, okay, engage the ministry responsible, or engage the government body responsible, or engage the local government responsible. Sometimes that doesn't work right away. You have to find multiple entry points. And one multiple entry point at the time we started this engagement was using Sustainable Energy for All initiative. And at this stage now, right now, we are supporting the Ministry of Energy through the Ministry of Community Development. And this is a crucial issue. But another issue is that sometimes, I remember by the time when the Ministry of Sustainable Energy for All Gender Action Plan was completed, some of the donors were pledging to fund the document implementation. And then we found out to say, this is really good. If somebody else can fund this document, it will be really good. But that also could not happen. The funding was there, but why the document was not implemented. So we found that funding will not solve everything. Most of the time, funding can take you so far, but most of the time you have to make sure that you are smart enough to know how to approach different people in different areas. Yes. So according to the, what actors do you think should be involved, especially at the policy level, and exactly how you can involve it? First of all, we usually advise to refrain from approaching senior staff at the ministry level or even at the local government level when it comes to these things, because two things. Most of our senior staff hold a lot of things, and they might forget what you told them in the last meeting you had with them. Second, senior staff change a lot. The turnover of senior staff in the ministry is usually very high. I mean, the ministers, the permanent secretaries usually change 2 years, 1 year. So always start with the mid-management staff, and this is usually during the inception of policy influencing. The mid-management staff will actually show you and tell you how to navigate the corridors. And then after the ministry, the mid-management staff have that, they can actually direct you toward the senior staff. Most of the time, senior staff are more agreeable to to these influencing issues, advocacy and lobbying, if their management staff are actually telling them to do so. But also at the same time, the national or subnational gender mainstreaming machinery is very important. As I said here, instead of going directly most of the time to the ministries or in the institutions which want to influence, find their way around. What kind of institutions are around that can influence them? Some countries have very strong NGOs. Which have been in the sector for really long, and they've already earned a seat when it comes to many decision-making processes. Approach them. In our case, we're the ministry which is responsible for gender mainstreaming. So most of the time, make sure that instead of going directly to approach these people, find a way to go around, especially when it comes to the other machinery. Yes. Another thing is international gender empowerment support is very crucial. We tangsen, we were supported by Nigeria to develop our capacity. And when we approach the ministries and the local government level and everywhere, we use experience from international level. We use experience from Nepal, we use experience from India, we use experience from Kenya, we use experience from Botswana, every place. And this can only be possible if you have this international gender empowerment support. On our side, we're in Nigeria, but could be there other institutions, and for example, Access Coalition. This kind of support are very crucial when it comes to the development of capacity, because sometimes there are so many dynamics changing, and you have to catch up on that. And some countries will be successful in one area, another country will be successful in two areas. So, and also when it comes to financing, most of the time we find that on issues like gender, some places is a new thing. To them to set funding to implement a new thing, especially which does not directly show what kind of positive output or financial output they can get from it, it's become difficult, especially when it comes to government, the budgeting system and everything. So this international gender empowerment support can help to secure international funding, which can be used to be like initial steps when it comes to realization of gender responsiveness in the policies and how it can actually be possible. And later on, the government might pledge to continue the financing, the implementation, and the sustainability of these gender mainstreaming actions. Yes, thank you very much. I'll be very interested to hear from other speakers and also the questions. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Thabit, for this very insightful presentation. For me, at least, it was very interesting to hear a concrete example of how gender was mainstreamed in policies in Tanzania and what role tangsen played in that process. But also, it was very interesting to hear what influence gender responsiveness has on the policy level. And of course, how gender mainstreaming on the policy level is very different from gender mainstreaming on the project level. Now, before we hand over to our third speaker, I would like to ask you a question again. And this question is, where are you connecting from today? So I can already see a good balance between participants from Africa and from Asia, and many participants also from Europe today, and 6% from Oceania. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for participating. We can now already head to our last presentation, which is given by our third speaker, Ashma Pakhrin. And she is a monitoring, evaluation, and learning expert in South Asia, sub-regional economic cooperation. And she has more than 13 years of experience in monitoring and evaluation, specifically in gender and energy, mostly in the domestic and productive use of energy sector. She has more than 9 years of experience in designing, implementing, and managing results-based monitoring and evaluation systems in international projects on gender equality and social inclusion and energy, and many years of experience in the economic empowerment of entrepreneurs, mostly rural women, and also men from excluded groups from various districts of Nepal. Besides, she is also a lead trainer of agency-based empowerment. Yes, we are very pleased to welcome you, Ashma, today. And you will mainly speak about the question of how gender responsiveness and productive uses of energy can be addressed together. Please go ahead, Ashma.
Thank you, Madeline, for my introduction, and thank you all for being here. And I'm here today to talk you all about how rural women were empowered through productive use of energy through a project. And before we deep dive into the approaches of the project, let's have a glimpse of country context. So I would like to introduce my country as a home of world's tallest peak, Mount Everest, and birthplace of Buddha. The country has 30 million population, comprising 52% female population, and 80% of the population resides in rural areas with agriculture and allied activities as the major source of income, and 92% of the population has already been connected to electricity. And in the rural settings, if we look at the socioeconomic challenges of women, rigid social norms and unequal power relationship between women and men, such as differences in access to resources and knowledge, including education, and deeply embedded concept of women have to be primary caregivers and homemakers, has definitely hindered and is hindering women's opportunities for decent work and economic empowerment. And if we again scan on the challenges rural women face being entrepreneurs, time management and family support is one of the key, followed by personal insecurities like fear of failure, low confidence, also the constraints on freedom of movement. and also the limited information on the availability of the opportunities such as subsidized loans, grants and supports from local governments, and business enabling environment has still lagged women entrepreneurs behind. See, this is one of the case. She is Durga, and you can clearly read that. I was really surprised to know that she spends 6 hours daily cutting grasses to feed her 10 buffaloes, and she does this because she fears if not paid well, it will impact her income. In spite she hurts her hand every single day. So you can see in the picture how she cuts. I also have that video, and see here comes the role of energy, which we call productive use of energy, which means using of energy to increase income and productivity. In our project, we used grid electricity as the energy use. And she is Januka, one of our happy entrepreneurs. She stated that after using electric sewing machine in her tailoring business, her income has doubled, because previously she used to sew only 2 dresses per day. Now, with the help of the electric sewing machine, she can sew 4 to 5 dresses, and her income has been doubled. And most she liked about the machine was that she could work even in her perinatal period, pre and post pregnancy period. And she is Gyani, and she started using electric mill for feed preparation for her poultry, and she stopped buying expensive feed from market and started using local resources, saving 3,230 euros per annum. And from this saving, she stated that she expanded her business and even employed a local person as her helper. So from these examples, now we are pretty clear on how the use of technologies are gender responsive, reducing drudgery, promoting labor efficiency, reducing cost of production, resulting to economic and welfare gains to women. And now we deep dive into the concrete case of project and how it's supported in a holistic manner on achieving 502 women's full potential of entrepreneurship development through use of productive use of energy and business support services for the economic empowerment. So if we see the project approach, this is a framework to measure women's economic empowerment, and this clearly illustrates that power and agency and economic advancement are the two interrelated components of economic empowerment, and the resources play a critical role to succeed economically and to exercise power and agency. And it emphasizes that when women gets resources like trainings and supports, they have new skills, increased ability to make decisions, and then they adopt new business practice. Gradually, their bargaining power increases and can access to new market. They increase their business profits and confidence to control the profits and its investment in household level as well. And as a result, women become economically empowered with improved livelihood and financial independence. So let's have a glance on what resources the project provided to empower 502 entrepreneurs in 8 districts of Nepal. Firstly, the local partners were capacitated so that they can support the entrepreneurs, and 3 types of trainings were provided to the women. One was the business management training, one was the agency-based empowerment, and the third was specific skill trainings. And also the orientation, they were also orientation on the adoption of the energy efficient technologies, and also oriented on the safe use of electricity. And the regular business counseling was also provided with the help of our business development coordinators who were there in the field to support throughout. And they were also linked with low interest rate loans and linked with backward and forward linkages, and they were also onboarded and linked with local government for leveraging the supports. So if we see now what were the approaches, the gender responsive approaches in the project, the budget were allocated for children and child caretakers, even husbands during their stay in the training events, and the family members, especially husband and in-laws, whoever were married, were also oriented on the project and the importance of women's economic empowerment and the importance of family members. And the family members were also provided business counseling along with the entrepreneur so that she gets adequate support to run her business. And also the written commitment of family members were also taken to support her business. And educational level was not prioritized for the selection in the project, since the scenario in Nepal is that the rural women generally have lower literacy level, so we didn't prioritize this as one of our major criteria. And to improve, to remove the personal insecurities like lower confidence level and fear, and to boost up the power and agency-based empowerment sessions were integrated in the technical trainings, and also separate trainings were provided during a pandemic. So if we look at the project achievements in the component of economic advancement, women, the entrepreneurs invested USD 2.9 million for establishment and expansion of the business, and out of which 1.5 USD million were equity and USD 1.4 million were loan taken. And if we see at the loan repayment status, we see that almost 100% of the entrepreneurs were paying regularly and on timely manner. And if we look at the comparison of the average income, we see that on the baseline, the average income of the entrepreneurs were 317. It was actually taking very good pace, but in between, before pandemic, it was increased to $436. But since the COVID-19 pandemic really hit hard to the entrepreneurs, it declined to 384. However, if we see, still 21% of the income is still increased than of the baseline. And when we asked on the perception of our entrepreneurs and what did the technology adoption benefited them, and 68% of them stated that it enhanced their productivity, and 35% stated time saved, and then product quality was enhanced since the machinery were used, and the cost of production were also reduced. And as the achievement, as a result, we were also successfully leveraged financial and technical supports to women entrepreneurs from the local government, which was worth USD 89,280. The supports were mainly 75% of the supports received were equipment and material supports, and 13% were training, and the remaining 12% were financial support received. And if we look at the achievements from power and agency area, 90% of the women entrepreneurs claim that they are now less hesitant to talk, now they are open to talk with the stakeholders, and even in the meetings and exhibitions. And 91% of the women entrepreneurs stated that their business decision capacity has been enhanced, like in decision making, like setting up business, business expansion, keeping employees, purchases, taking loans, etc. And 98% of the women entrepreneurs stated that the agency-based empowerment training followed by the intensive counseling was very helpful to boost them back confidence lost during COVID-19 pandemic. So these are the three main key learnings during our 3 years long project. So the one is that gender responsive approaches and energy intervention plays a very key role in women's economic empowerment through especially if it's entrepreneurship development, and the post-training supports like business counseling, mentoring, and household handling supports are proved to be critical for the success. And the linkages with ecosystem stakeholders like market linkages, backward and forward market linkages, and with service providers ensures sustainability of the women's business. So this project was funded by ADB and SIDA, and the implementation partners were Energy International Netherlands as the lead, and as the national partners we were Center for Rural Technology, Practical Action Consulting, and Nikon. And with the same model, we have also replicated the same model in Province 2. Now the donors is Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and ADB with almost the same implementing partners. Now we are in implementation phase now. So I would like to conclude my presentation with a very nice quote from Hillary Clinton, which states that women are the largest untapped reservoir of talent in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashma, for your presentation on the importance of productive uses of energy for women and how it can positively influence women's business and livelihoods, and also what is necessary to integrate gender responsiveness in productive use of energy projects. We are now already heading to the discussion part of today's webinar. And first, I would like to point a question at Silvia. You explained in a very detailed way what gender responsiveness actually means and how it can be distinguished from other concepts such as gender sensitive or gender transformative approaches. You also explained in a very well understandable way how gender responsiveness can actually be applied to projects and programs through gender analysis and gender action plans. So now I would like to know, could you share some lessons learned on common mistakes or best practices in mainstreaming gender in energy projects?
Thank you, Madeleine, for this follow-up question, and thank you also to the other panelists for a very inspiring indeed set of presentations. Yes, in the interest of time, I would like to highlight four main aspects. The first one, as I mentioned briefly in my earlier speech, is really the importance of considering gender aspects at the very beginning of the design phase. I've seen very often that projects come into looking at gender when the project is maybe already through midterm review or in the second half of the implementation, and very often just because they are prompted by donors or by evaluators to account for gender considerations. Obviously, if this happens, it is already very late in the project implementation to truly factor in gender considerations and to be able to unlock gender responsive or gender transformative approaches. So it's really important that these elements are taken into account at the very beginning, and that they're, you know, in the same way as you start thinking about your budget, your activities, your resources, and the partners that you bring into a project, do also think of what gender impact you want to achieve and how you can realistically do so. And to do that, it's really important also that local stakeholders are engaged from the very beginning of the project design, because again, if a project is designed, you know, out of as a desk exercise from far away from the actual implementation area, there are a lot of nuances, a lot of sensitivities, a lot of cultural specificities that go missing. And these play really a strategic role in the actual implementation and impact of gender aspects, because gender matters are very much linked with social and cultural norms. So it's really important that one is aware of the specific cultural and social context where the project is going to be played out. And a point I would really like to stress is also that when we're talking about including women, very often reference is made only to women in terms of beneficiaries. But it is, for me, equally important to also consider women in the remaining ecosystem of a project, meaning also look at the gender breakdown in your project implementing team, in your consortium, and among your stakeholders. Because what we see very often is that there are issues, or there are also territories where having a woman working with another woman makes a big difference in terms of having access to information that might be maybe personal, maybe sensitive, maybe confidential. So I've seen projects that we deliver specific services to women, whether it's technology, whether it's access to finance, that were entirely run by men. And this actually limited very much the impact and the efficiency of the project, because, for instance, when you're talking about financial aspects, that for cultural reasons would not feel comfortable opening up with a man, talking about the power relations within the household or their financial conditions. So I would really like to recommend that gender issues of gender balance are considered not just in terms of beneficiaries, but also of the partners and the stakeholders that are involved into running a project. And then maybe one final point is also to remember issues of intersectionality, meaning that when we're talking about gender, it's not just a matter of whether we're talking of a man or a woman. And actually, to be truly honest, gender is not a binary concept alone, but very in practice it is still mostly implemented as a binary concept. But that's another story. What I mean here is that when we are looking at working with different genders, we should also take into account and assess the other characteristics that define the livelihood, the conditions of a man and a woman. So it's not just a matter of whether a person identifies him or herself as a man or a woman, but also their level of income, their level of education, their ethnic or religious affiliation. There are a lot of other elements in the context that determine their current situation, their vulnerabilities, but also the opportunities to enhance the situation on the ground. So maybe I stop at here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia, for these answers, and yeah, for this very, very interesting points that you raised. We have more questions actually coming into the chat. We are almost at the end of our webinar, but we maybe bear with us a few minutes more so we can consider some more questions. I think this one goes to Thabit. Is sensitizing institutions helping in any way? And what relationship between women entrepreneurs and what is the relationship, or what should the relationship be like, I guess, between women entrepreneurs and the ministries of energy? Thabit, could you say a few words to that?
Thank you very much. Is sensitizing institution helping? As I mentioned before, is that you just have to know what kind of entry point you should use. As I mentioned, that some of the institutions, for example, very old, large NGOs can have like a very upper hand, most of the decision making in the government, and they could be used as a good entry point. But also, if you are relying or you are putting a unique thing to these policymakers, and that unique thing actually you can demonstrate its benefit to them, most of the time it works. But yes, I can say sensitizing institutions usually help. In our case, we use a ministry which is responsible for sensitizing gender in the government. So that actually was our good entry point. But in other countries, we find there could be an NGO, either development partners or academia. Most of the countries, we find academia is very strong when it comes to gender issues, and you can use academia as your entry point. Yes. But also, what is the relationship between entrepreneurs and the government? I cannot say there is, because, well, the government is everywhere, in a sense that women entrepreneurs are usually directly linked to local governments instead of the national government. But in the case of Tanzania, we have our local government does not have full autonomy when it comes to planning. They usually probably have 50% autonomy. 50% is directives directly from the national government. So in one way or another, I can say the national government links with the women entrepreneurs through local governments. If you're an entrepreneur, you're supposed to be registered and mostly be known at the local government level. I hope I've been able to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thabit. I will quickly follow up with the next question. To Ashma, can you enlarge a bit on which kind of specific actions, interventions can contribute to apply a gender-responsive approach? It seems that broad types of skills topics might be needed, and not only energy-related knowledge or skills. Could you say something to this question, please?
So, as I have already mentioned, that there are many responsive approaches we took, but besides that, since we also provided several levels of trainings, and we also think that only providing trainings doesn't actually work. The pre and post supports, like we mentioned, like support plays a crucial role. For example, even the gender responsive approaches and also the linkages with entrepreneur ecosystem stakeholders, and that works for the sustainability. I think I have answered that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashma. I would like to pose one last question to Thabit. Could you please explain why funding will not solve everything? Do you have any experiences on that? And yeah, could you elaborate on that point a bit?
Thank you again. Yes, when we say that funding could not solve everything, is sometimes we find out that during your initial involvement with them, the first thing they told that, okay, you are saying a lot of things, mainstreaming gender, capacity building, and all of that. Is it going to be, we don't have the budget, we don't have that money to do that. Well, gender mainstreaming in policy, gender mainstreaming even at the national level requires financing, requires capacity, also which requires resources. And then on our side, we said, okay, we'll try our best to fundraise with you so that you can have this money to be able to do this, because to them it was a completely new thing. There was no more convincing you can tell them that they can set their own funding. And then we found that funding, we had the money to do that. And then still, we could not do it. So we saw that, oh, even if we got the money, we could not do everything what we did. You see, first of all, we can buy in. You know, we have to find the buy-in, political will that will make even the funding be able to be usable in the implementation. So I think when we say funding was not everything, is the fact that some of the issues could not be solved after we even raised the funding, after we even raised the initial money which was needed to roll out the first activities. We needed the political will. We needed the structures to be aligned. We needed the responsiveness of the senior people in the positions. We needed the we needed their time, and all of that we couldn't get it. And then we just have to. We had really good funding, but we had to return it. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thabit, for this explanation. We are already 5 minutes over our time, so I would like to wrap it up now. Thank you for staying with us and also for joining us today. And I learned a lot from our speakers, and I'm sure also the audience did. And if you're further interested in the topic, you for sure can reach out to the speakers, or if you would like to hear again what we talked about today, we will upload a recording of the session soon on our webpage, so you could take a look at it again. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you will have a great day. Thank you. Bye.